You ever have that feeling, that quiet, kind of unsettling doubt that maybe our moral instincts aren't quite enough for the world we're living in? It's this little hesitation that just pops up, and suddenly we're left with some really, really tough questions. Okay, let's get into this.
This question, wow, it is right at the heart of so much of the anxiety floating around today. Are we being naive? Are our good intentions actually creating brand new problems? It's so hard to talk about this honestly without being shut down, but if we don't, we leave this huge space for other, less careful voices to fill.
So we have to reframe this whole thing. The real conflict isn't some simple black and white battle between compassion and cruelty. Nope. The actual struggle, the one that matters, is between our deep human impulse to care and the practical need to have a society, to have systems that actually work, systems that can sustain that compassion without falling apart.
So how on earth do well-intentioned people, people like us, end up backing policies that can have some pretty harmful outcomes? Well, it turns out there is a psychological process for that, one that explains exactly how it happens, and a lot of the time, we don't even see it coming.
It's a concept called moral disengagement. And it's not like you wake up one day and decide to just throw your values out the window. Not at all. As the psychologist Albert Bandura laid it out, it's more like a series of small mental adjustments, tiny little shifts in how we think that let us live with choices that would otherwise make us feel, well, pretty awful.
And this path, it's a slippery slope, and it happens one step at a time. It all starts with justification, framing a tough policy as being for the greater good. Then comes the language game, relabeling. Suddenly, harsh actions become procedures, and people become migratory flows. Then we start to compare favorably. Well, at least we're not doing that worst thing. After that, responsibility gets diffused across a whole system, so nobody feels like it's their fault. And the final step? The consequences get dehumanized. Real people with real lives just turn into statistics, burdens, problems to be managed.
And that's the end result of it all. Harm doesn't feel moral anymore. It doesn't feel personal. It just feels administrative, like you're just processing paperwork. It's a quiet, insidious process, but its effects are absolutely massive. But here's where it gets really tricky. This whole slide into moral disengagement, it often starts from a place of very real, very legitimate concern. There are genuine dilemmas out there that don't just vanish because we wish they would. I mean, take this one. This is a huge question. It's about social cohesion, right? The invisible glue that holds a community together. At what point does the pace of change start to wear away at that trust? That's a real dilemma. Or what about our social safety nets? Of course we want them to be generous, but we also need them to be sustainable. How do you find that perfect balance between being open-hearted and being responsible? It's an incredible challenge for any society. And this is the classic paradox of tolerance, isn't it? Our open societies are built on this value. But what do you do when that very openness is used to try and tear the whole thing down? Where do you draw the line? So let's be super clear about this. Just asking these questions is not a moral failing. In fact, we have to ask them. The real failure, the real danger, is when we let fear, instead of careful, deliberate thought, start writing the answers. Okay, so if we know the problem, how do we start building a solution? Well, that brings us to a kind of toolkit for thinking clearly. A few key principles that can help us navigate all this without losing our compassion or our coherence. First up, we have to pull apart two ideas that get tangled up all the time: empathy and indulgence. Empathy is absolutely vital. It's about understanding why someone is in the situation they're in. But that is completely different from indulgence, which says we have to excuse every single action that comes from that situation. You can understand desperation without saying that breaking the law is okay.
Now, this next idea I find really useful. It's called the searchlight principle. See, bad policy is like a floodlight. It's just this big, blinding glare that casts suspicion on everybody. But good policy? That's a searchlight. It's focused, it's precise, it targets the actual problem, a specific harmful behavior, a broken rule, without making everyone else a suspect. It's about being competent, not just outraged.
And here's a simple but really powerful mental check: the human scale test. Before you get behind a policy, before you use certain language, just pause and imagine the person who's going to be affected by it is sitting right there, across the dinner table from you. Would you still say it?
It's not about being sentimental, it's about keeping a sense of proportion, a sense of humanity.
We also have to be honest that a lot of the anger in these debates, well, it's actually rooted in a kind of grief. A grief for continuity, for the feeling that the world is stable and makes sense. A mature, healthy response doesn't just dismiss that fear, but it doesn't surrender to it either. It holds the tension. It says, yes, this change feels scary, but no, that's not an excuse to abandon our core values. So when you put all of these pieces together, where do you end up? You end up with a philosophy for how to act, and it's built on a pretty profound paradox about the very values we're trying to protect. You could call this approach the discipline of conscious resistance. And look at what it does. It resists dysfunction, not people. It pairs compassion with clear expectations. It insists on mutual obligation for everyone. And it actively rejects those easy, comfortable mental shortcuts of moral disengagement. Yeah, it's slower. It's way harder. But it's how you build things that last. And this leads us to the great paradox at the heart of it all. The very things we cherish most about an open society, generosity, tolerance, fairness, they are incredibly fragile. They can't just survive on good vibes. They need to be protected by clear structures, by fair rules, and by systems that are willing to say no just as thoughtfully as they say yes.
So if there's one thought to leave you with, it's this. The real danger isn't that we're going to care too much, that our empathy will run wild. No, the real danger is that in all the noise and the fear, we will just stop thinking carefully about how we care. And in that moment, we risk losing both our compassion and our coherence, all at once.